Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at The Avid Reader.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Kelly Spring. She's the author of Spam, A Cultural History, published by Reaction Press, which is a great press, and it's part of its edible series, which is also great. It'll be released later this summer. Kelly's a food historian. She's the owner of The Fork Front, which I suggest you take a look at. It's really interesting. Deals with all things food. And her current work that she's working on now, I guess, is there's one, Eating with the Dead, which sounds morbid, but it'll be interesting. Then the Korean diaspora, which is Korean food, which may figure prominently in today's interview. Wartime rations today, which we'll find out about whether they still include Spam, and kimchi, which also in Korea, South Korea, where Spam is almost a staple and a delicacy. It also features in some recipes. Also, there's tons of great recipes at the end of the book involving Spam. This year, I think, is like the 80th anniversary of World War II. And World War II is kind of what propelled Hormel and Spam into the public consciousness. I guess it was started in 1937. It was based on cuts of meat, the shoulder particularly, that were not big sellers. And so Hormel was asked to try to use that meat to kind of create something that people would eat, especially canned, and that would stay preserved for a long time. It really didn't have, well, I'll let Kelly talk about it, but it only has 7 ingredients, maybe not even 7. It's pork with ham, salt, water, sugar, potato starch, sodium nitrite, and sodium ascorbate, which I didn't think it contained in the beginning. But anyway, Kelly, let's let you talk more about it rather than me rambling on. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. You sort of gave a good overview of what Spam is. It's so many interesting things that you don't think about at this very unassuming pork processed product, really.
And it's funny because in the acknowledgments, you were working, you had a vague idea about Spam, and then your friend suggested, hey, Reaction is doing this edible series. Maybe you ought to pitch it to them. Tell me, one, why you were working with Spam in the first place, and then how you got to Reaction.
Yeah, thank you. So my good friend, Dr. Marcy Friedman, who sadly died last year, knew that I was working on Spam and sent me their call for books, as you pointed out. So this was a pandemic project. So, I was sitting at home, I was bored. What does a historian do when they're bored? They do more research. I'm really dedicated to my craft as it is. So as a food historian, and I'm a war food historian, and I look at British war food and also American war food, and think about wider aspects of how it relates to people's relationships, the home front, the military front, gender, and so on. And so, I'm sitting at home, and I'm sort of, in the evenings, I would be looking at the British Library's online newspapers and looking for Spam. When I did my PhD in the UK at the University of Manchester, I could see that Spam was in some of the research that I found, but I never really had time to focus on it. And so because pandemic, you had loads of time that you needed to entertain yourself. That's kind of how I entertained myself, I guess, with Spam, which sounds sort of strange. And originally I had sort of done it as an interesting project. And I thought, okay, I'll write an article about it. I was used to writing like academic articles. And then when my friend sent me this call for papers, I was like, well, okay. And so the original research, if you want to look at the book, it's in chapter 3. It's the chapter on British history. So that was what it used to be an article, and then it became so much more. And so it has an interesting life in itself, this book process.
It's funny. We exchanged an email before the interview where I said I had bought those singly packaged slices.
It's good to see you saw that.
And so I made myself a Spam, egg, and cheese omelet.
I wondered what you did with it. Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that would be a good way to start. I put a lot of butter and I fried it up really well on both sides after I had cubed it. And
that was good. That's the best way to eat it.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, you preface the book by talking about people know about it, but they either love it or they just
exactly.
And so I ate it, but
what was your verdict?
My verdict was I wouldn't do it again.
Had you had it before? Or was this a brand new experience for you?
The funny thing is the reason why I never had it was because my father, who was in World War II, was a captain in the Philippines.
Ah, interesting.
When he came back, he told me he would
Mm.
never ever have Spam again.
Okay.
That's all he had, so I never did either.
Ah, okay. So your dislike or your aversion to it is a result of the war. I mean, this is a great example of how wartime food kind of continues on and has this long-lasting life, and Spam and your example is perfect of that. So I'm sorry I didn't know about that. I could have, included that in the book. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's probably some people, because my father would never have it in the house, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
kid voluntarily go out and buy Spam, although I saw it everywhere. But it's interesting, especially as a historian. One of the things I was fascinated with the book was how we carry our culture with us
Mm.
to other lands, and then we leave,
Yeah.
our culture remains. And I think as a historian, you talk a lot about how food travels and the country travels with it.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing about food history in general as a discipline. Like food doesn't just stay in one place, it has this expanding aspect. So people move around, they bring food with them, they adapt their food ways to where they're living. And in this case, because Spam becomes a sort of war food and it's traveling around with the soldiers, so they pass it on to all these different people in the Philippines. Like your father, would have passed it on to people living there, and sort of in Guam and Hawaii, where there's the Pacific Command is, and in Korea. And so the soldiers become this sort of vehicle for transferring this food. And then you can see this food living on in these places today, and it becomes a kind of intergenerational exchange as well. It's a bit like if you think of other American things like clothing or pop music or McDonald's, for example, it's sort of all over the world. And this sort of people buy into this as a kind of American lifestyle, American, they're interested in this culture, but it forms a kind of American, what do you call sort of soft power or sort of diplomacy, and that it's influencing people's opinions of Americans and connection to America in ways maybe they don't think about, and food is very powerful way to do that.
And even in subcultures of America, like in Hawaii, you talk a lot about Hawaii.
Yeah, yeah,
I never thought like McDonald's and Burger King have
yeah.
Spam on the menus in Hawaii.
Yeah, can you imagine that in sort of mainland the United States? We'd never see it, but because Spam is so popular there, I mean, it's something like everybody eats like 5 tins of Spam on average a year there, just in their homes. But because it's so popular, then you see it in McDonald's, like Spam and eggs kind of thing. It's so common, and it just shows you the different value of Spam in different parts of the world, and sort of in Hawaii and elsewhere.
Well, I took that display package of the singles into work, and I said,
Okay.
I laid it out on the front desk, and I said, hey, if you spend $20 or more, you get a free.
Oh, did you? Oh, and what was the uptake? I'm really curious about that.
That's what I wanted to lead into my next question.
Yeah, yeah.
All the young kids looked at it and they went, 80% went, oh. But several of the older people, as old as me, were happy to.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, they were happy to have the free Spam. So that reminds me that even though we're talking about it, there's kids don't hear in America, in certain demographics have no idea what we're talking about. So I guess you should go back to 1937 and why and how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, the intergenerational difference. So some people pass it on and some do not, depending on their perception of Spam, just like you're saying, So it's produced in 1937 by the Hormel Corporation, and they make it, as you said, because there's sort of leftover pork shoulder, which was not really valuable, but they needed to do something, their business, And this is the height of the Great Depression, and people needed inexpensive foods. And so Hormel had already produced canned goods such as Dentimore beef stew, chili con carne, and these are all inexpensive canned things that can feed a family well, but they don't have to pay a lot, and if they don't have a lot because of the Great Depression. So Spam is one of these things. And it's a great source. Like it's a 12-ounce can, the singles are a new kind of thing, but it normally comes in and traditionally comes in a 12-ounce can. And that was meant to feed a family of 4 during the Depression. And you can think like it's important to have protein as a part of a balanced diet, but other forms of meat might have been expensive, where this would be the least expensive choice to still feed your family with the things to keep them healthy and keep them going in this very deep economic time when people were sort of suffering and huge unemployment.
And then, since it was so close to the war, and the need to have foods that didn't have to be preserved, refrigerated, preserved, they weren't perishable. And I mean, like they used to make cans that were made of lead, and then the guys on the ships would die. And
it's not made of lead. It was never made of lead, thankfully, thank God. Yeah.
So how is it that it's able to be preserved basically forever?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process. So it's cooked, it's sort of ground up, and these different ingredients are added as you listed, sort of the sugar and the salt and the sodium nitrite now, modified potato starch. And so it's ground up all together, and then it's put in a can, and then it's cooked in the can in a kind of water bath. And then it's sealed. And so it's like vacuum sealed. So if you think it's similar process to like canning and preserving, and so that helps preserve it, and so as you said, it's shelf stable, so it can be carried around. And this was very useful when the soldiers are out in the field, when we're giving it as food aid during the war. If people are bombed out, they don't have cooking facilities, it's already cooked. So you can, if you have to, you can eat it right out of the can. You don't have to, fry it up. And maybe you don't have butter to fry it up, or you don't have pans, you don't have anything. So it becomes this really important food to help with people who need protein or who are starving, depending on where they're giving the food to people. I mean, it's so useful today and as well as in wartime for that kind of idea of shelf stableness.
As I read the book and then started my own little bit of research, and I found things like I didn't, and maybe it even was in the book, how Khrushchev of all people said, if it wasn't for Spam, the army would have died. And you think, okay, it actually was really, really, really important.
Really important. Yeah, really. So the Americans Hormel made a sort of special kind of recipe, I guess you want to say, that was more towards Russian taste, and they're sort of making it and giving it to the Russians. So yeah, that sort of, you can think of Russia. I mean, they had huge amounts of losses, on the Eastern Front. And so Spam was really useful, so it's just really interesting. You look at it and you think, oh, it's just a basic food. And, and it, as you said, maybe sort of generations now might not value it, but during wartime, it was really useful.
And as a food historian, it almost becomes a kind of currency at times as well, because of its inherent stable value. And then other things that were so strange were like, some soldiers used it to grease their guns. And
you've heard that, yeah, yes.
And also
they had that, I mean, before, sorry, excuse me. The modern version doesn't have like fat. It has fat in it, but it doesn't have like a layer of fat in it. Yeah. Whereas the older version, the recipe was slightly different. And so they had this huge amount of fat, which was quite useful, as you're saying, for guns. But like, if you think of British housewives who were buying it, fats were rationed in wartime. And so that's really valuable. So not only do you get protein, but you get these fats that you can make different things with, cook different things, when butter and margarine and everything else you couldn't get so easily. So it becomes doubly useful for the British.
Even the can had value after the Spam was eaten.
Yeah, because they sort of don't have tin, and they don't have, so, it has all these multiple layers that modern consumers would never consider, I mean, we have so much abundance and so many choices now, but if you think in wartime, you don't have McDonald's and you don't have choices, and you're happy to get what you can, because there is a lack of everything, especially in like Russia, for example, or when we look at Korea, people are starving, so they're really desperate to have anything. And so it changes the value completely of this little can of processed pork, Remarkable.
How did it become so culturally embedded, like say in South Korea, where people would go to someone's house for a party and bring a gift of Spam?
Yeah, that's really interesting story. I mean, the Korean, it sort of goes back and forth in Korea. So Spam comes to Korea as part of the Korean War in the early 50s, and the Americans bring it with them. And Koreans are starving, so they don't have a well-organized government. They don't have a ration system. They're sort of desperate for food, and so the soldiers have Spam, and sometimes they give it as gifts, or they use it as a way to get information from the Korean population about enemy movements. They also sometimes take scraps of Spam that they've used in the U.S. mess halls and sell it at the gates to the Koreans because they're so desperate for food. And then after the war, there's a gap. So Spam is not being imported into Korea. The only way you can get it is if you're on an American military base, or you sort of Koreans themselves couldn't buy it unless they were buying it on the black market. And so there's like a 34-year gap where it almost gets more value because it's sort of in a way a luxury item because it's bought on this black market and you buy it for more. So only wealthy people could afford it. At the same time, some people don't want it because it represents poverty and it represents devastation in the peninsula. But then in 1986, a Korean company called CJ Cheiljedong creates this sort of contract with Hormel to produce it locally in Korea. And so then it becomes really popular. So, it's synonymous with American lifestyle. It's had this sort of gap. And so it had this sort of growing value. And it's an inexpensive food as well. And so it sort of takes off in Korea from like the late 80s onwards. And it becomes an important part of their different dishes. But as you're saying about the gift giving, so in their national holidays, which are Chuseok, which is during the autumn, it's sort of like Thanksgiving is to us, and then Solal, which is around the New Year. You can go to the grocery store during this times and see like gift baskets of Spam, which when I lived in Korea for 3 years, and when I saw that, I was amazed, knowing that in the United States, we don't really eat Spam that much, it's not so valuable, but in Korea, they're giving it as gifts. And so it has a completely opposite value to them, so people can spend anywhere from, buy a can, which is, inexpensive, or you can buy, up to $100 gift basket of Spam. And that, to me, that's remarkable. And that's a newer trend. So that started around the 2000s, has continued to expand now. And that's, again, the sort of long durée of the war. The Korean War ended a long time ago, but the foodways still continue and become part of the Korean culture.
And also something else about the gift basket, which most people don't know, is how many different varieties of Spam are there and how many are tailored to specific cultures?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So that's interesting. So, okay, so I should start with the basics. So currently there are 12 varieties of Spam. And this is not counting the limited edition varieties. So limited edition includes things like, in past years, have included things like pumpkin spice Spam. I've never had it. Figgy pudding Spam. I've never had it. I have it, but I haven't eaten it. I sort of collect it. And other varieties include, newer ones are like maple Spam, or like turkey Spam, things like that. So you can't buy all the varieties in one location unless you buy them online, or you go to Austin, Minnesota, where the Hormel plant is that makes Spam, and you go to the Spam Museum. So you can go to the Spam Museum. It's really interesting, fascinating, tells the history of Spam. And in the gift shop, you can buy all these varieties. It's the only place in the world. So if you go to places like the Philippines or Korea, you can't buy all these varieties. And even in the US grocery stores, you can't buy all the varieties. But some of the flavors are particularly tailored to or influenced by the places where Spam is sold outside of the United States. So, for example, there's one flavor, Spam Hot and Spicy, which includes Tabasco in it. And this was inspired by the Americans sort of being in Guam. In Guam, they recaptured Guam in 1944, and they kind of come in and they take over a lot of the land, and they need to import a lot of food and feed the population. A lot of the food they're feeding them is Spam or the processed goods. And so in Guam today, they're the highest consumers of Spam in the world outside of the United States. And so Tabasco also is part of this story. So the Americans introduced Tabasco to Guam. And so it's the sort of marriage of these two flavors and this historical aspect of it that results in this combination. usually you can't buy that in the grocery store on the American side, but you can buy it online, as I said. The newest flavor this year is a Korean barbecue flavor. So this is sort of inspired by both the historical aspect of Korean history with Spam, but also I think it's inspired by the rise of Korean food culture in America. Korean food has become much more popular, I would say, from the pandemic onwards. And so you can see it you can see all kinds of restaurants. You can see it in like the New York Times, the cooking, the food section. And so Korean food becomes really popular. And so again, there's this marriage of these historical aspects as well as maybe modern consumption practices in Korean barbecue Spam. And I have to say, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I know. It's funny.
I wondered if you tried it. I highly recommend this flavor, especially fried a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in the past year, 2 Korean restaurants have opened in my little suburban area of Philadelphia. And they're good. And the Korean wings are really good. And the hot table is really good. And it's funny, I had never, until I read your specialty and the book, I never really thought about it in a cultural sense. I thought of sitting down eating. But then
there's so much more to it. Yeah.
It reminded me of when I went to Hershey, and there's every Hershey candy, and the only place you can buy it. And then I went to the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, and they have on the 3rd floor all those different vending machines.
Yeah, you could try all the different flavors. Yeah.
And they're really different. And some of them, again, I would never drink this again, but then somebody really finds it really good.
Exactly. So I think, I always think like, I like to, when I go on holiday, I always look for where the food museums, and is there someplace I can go, because you get this really unique experience, and maybe you're going to have a flavor that is not available near you, but it's available somewhere in the world related to this product. And so I just find it an interest, as a food historian, I would, but I find it an interesting part of culture, both domestically and internationally, to see it through food.
Yeah, and like the other thing is, Hormel does have a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude about it. I mean, you didn't talk about it, but there's Spam-A-Lot and Monty Python.
Yes.
Which gave rise to Spam, which is more ubiquitous than the actual meat itself.
Right.
And Hormel sponsored Spam-A-Lot. And then the museum itself seems a little kitschy, and the little sign outside and all that, but they seem to have somewhat of a sense of humor about it.
Yeah, and I think you have to, it's kind of fun, and it's funny, and it's interesting. Like, it has a serious history, but also it touches so many lives in different ways. And so why not have a bit of fun with it? I mean, the Spam-A-Lot guys who were the Monty Python troupe, I mean, I think all of those men were born in World War II in Britain. And so they understood Spam, and so they're taking fun with it as well. And I highly encourage anybody who hasn't seen the Spam skit of the Monty Python, sketch to Google that, because that's hilarious, But
I don't like Spam.
Oh yeah, exactly. But food is serious, but food also should be fun.
You try to think of another one. Well, maybe you can. Another one that's in that same situation as Spam. Another one, but there must be some.
Oh, that's interesting to think about. I mean, maybe not as widespread, but there would be jokes about food. I'm just thinking like head cheese or.
Oh yeah, right. Oh,
yeah,
right.
I mean, not as extensively, but there are jokes about food, or like that particular to a certain culture, but other cultures don't understand the appeal.
Yeah, you talked about, and the British in World War II, hearts and brains and tripe were important because, like you said, there wasn't anything else. I tried making tripe one time.
Oh, I heard it's
so disgusted by the idea of the bag that all your organs sit in is what I'm cooking. It was not good.
But I think that's also like, if we think about different time periods and different perspectives of food. So, for example, if the British who are eating tripe or kidneys or whatever at that time in wartime, they would have had older generations where that would have been common to eat liver and things. And for example, like my grandparents and my parents would have eaten liver, but I can't stand it. I wouldn't eat it. And so there's like a generational perception of food and how that changes, or even cultural. So, for example, some countries eat no to tail. Or Native Americans, they might eat more of the animal than we do, but it's a perception. It's a sort of different values of food, really.
Yeah, I guess in World War II, the men who remember World War One, that was when they had really bad things like bully beef, which they thought were made from
Yeah.
horses who had died.
Yeah.
So
So in comparison,
exactly.
so it depends on your your frame of mind, I guess, and your background. And yeah, and that food sort of travels through that in different ways.
Yeah, it's well, what do you think of its future? I think in other parts of the world it has a very good future, but
Yeah.
here in the book you talk specifically about situations like COVID, where once
Yeah,
they
yeah.
scarcity, and you almost do a graph. You can almost do a graph of what's going on in America by the popularity of Spam.
That would be amazing. I'm going to do that in 2.0. That would be a great suggestion. Yeah, exactly. So the qualities that it had when it started in 1937 come back in force or are re-recognized by the Americans in COVID. So, we talked about it, shelf stable, it's already cooked. You don't need cooking facilities. So during COVID, we had difficulty at different times in terms of not having meat on the shelves in the grocery stores. We had this sort of lag because there was this high rate of disease. They needed to close the pork processing facilities. And so Spam sort of steps into that void. You can buy Spam. It serves the same purpose. You can cook it in all different ways. It's a good protein. Again, it's inexpensive. It also has the benefit that because it's shelf stable, you could buy a bit of it and you didn't have to keep going to the grocery store. So it reduces the risk of infection from like catching COVID, so that's an added benefit. And then, so because of that, you see an increase in Spam sales because people sort of recognize the value again of it. So it's sort of reclaiming it in a way and using it for a new purpose in modern times. So it's really useful.
Yeah. And Hormel has taken advantage, well, sometimes bad, but taken advantage of it because it was deemed to be an essential industry during COVID. But then,
later. Yeah.
but then the people who worked there got COVID.
Yeah. So it was a very mixed situation, right?
And the other thing was the strike, and then the union lost after a prolonged period, right?
Yeah. So the workers, I think they were on strike for about a year. It was a long period, and so they wanted higher rate of pay and better working conditions, and Hormel won in the end and they broke the strike, and so a lot of people didn't come back or were let go, and then they had to sort of change the workplace. So that has a kind of mixed history.
Well, I guess I got off track a little bit, but when I was saying, okay, the future of Spam in America, I mean, our society is so much different than when it was introduced, and the technology we have, AI, all the things that are so kind of different than Spam. What do you think will happen? Do you think it's going to continue on? Do you think it has a future, essentially?
I think it does. I think because of its sort of, because of the things that it represents in terms of, again, this idea of shelf stable, you can pick it up, you can keep it in your house. So, in recent times, we've had a lot of disease in terms of the environment and the food system. And so, it's a bit like is there going to be an outbreak of salmonella? Is there going to be an outbreak of listeria? What is this bird flu? What's going to happen to it? Is it going to reduce the chicken, what already has, the chicken, population, the egg amounts. And so, because Spam is sort of processed, it's almost like you could perceive it as maybe more safe because it's been processed and it's been canned and it's been sealed, and you could see it having this perception. Or let's say if you have this difficulty again, like another spike in the avian flu, or you have, a long time ago, we had mad cow disease. And so you had to be careful about that. It was more in Britain than it was here, but it could happen, particularly with the dysfunction that goes on in our food system today. And so you could have Spam in your cupboard in case you have some kind of major disaster in the food system and there's some disruption like we experienced in the pandemic. And so I think it'll be there kind of quietly. quietly in the background, ready to like fill in the gap when we need it. So like you're saying, this kind of spike up and down. So it might go down, but I think it will sort of always be there. You know, it has its use, it has its purpose, even now. Even if it's altered a little bit, it's still useful.
Yeah, and it's funny. The reason I guess I thought of it was because, even though there's been some knockoffs that Hormel has stopped in many cases,
Yeah.
there's never been anything that's like competed with it, like maybe like beef jerky or jerky sticks and stuff like that. But I can't think of anything else that really occupies that niche at all. I don't think there is anything.
Not really. I mean, as you said, they're knockoffs, or like corned beef hash you can get in a can, or Vienna sausages you can get in a can.
Every construction worker has on site.
Yes, but like you think of those as kind of side things or appetizers, whereas Spam can make the main dish, and it can be done in so many different ways. That's why I was curious what you were going to do with it, and as you can see in my book, there are all different recipes you can try from around the world. So it's versatile in that way that other canned meats definitely are not. I agree with you there.
I just realized when I was a kid, I loved Dinty Moore beef stew, and I really liked their chili con carne over rice.
Oh, see, there you go. Now you can reclaim that too, reclaim your historic.
But I don't think it's very healthy. I don't think it's healthy.
It's not. No. But I think Spam is interesting in that when we think about the history of Spam, particularly in the war, it changes our perception or allows us to think more about the complexity of ultra-processed food. So yes, a lot of ultra-processed food is not good for you. But in some cases, such as wartime or pandemic, ultra-processed food has its value.
Yeah.
And that changes the perception of how we think of those foods now. Now, I'm not urging people to go out and, eat loads of it, but just to think about it a little bit different way historically. Anyway.
I think they've always been proud of listing their ingredients,
Yeah. And there's nothing like, a lot of people I hear who ask me about, Spam, does it have all kinds of weird ingredients or like offal, like liver and hearts and terrible things that people shouldn't be eating? And actually, no, the ingredients as you listed are very few, and you can name all them and find most of them just in your cupboard. And so it isn't as dreadful as people have perceived it in the past in that sense.
When I read your ongoing interest in projects, it made me think about like which of those is going to be your next book. And all of them do tangentially, to a certain extent, remind me a little bit of Spam, only because this is the first time in my life I've thought of, only because of the cultural aspect. So as we conclude, what's the next you're actually going to come out with?
Yeah, so I am working very hard to get a draft done of a book. It's under contract. It's about looking at British wartime ration recipes and thinking about what can wartime recipes and wartime knowledge about food tell us and help modern consumers. Like, how can they reclaim that knowledge and help them in terms of 21st century concerns around the environment, around health, around reducing waste, and thinking about maybe substitutions, so using less eggs, using less meat. So it's a kind of comparison about taking this food history and applying it to today. And so it's a combination of, again, a lot of recipes from Britain, from World War II, but then a lot about how we can use these things. And so I hope people find that interesting as well.
I always say it's the last question, and then I ask another question. So
it's fine. Ask away.
This will be the last one, because what I was really interested in was the 21st century food for combat individuals, because the 20th century is what we've been dealing with.
Yes.
And what is the basis of your work on the 21st century ration?
Oh, in terms of the military?
Yeah.
Okay. So I haven't really done any work on this. So when I talk about 21st century, I think about the domestic consumer.
Okay.
As much. Thinking about 21st century military rations, that would be interesting. They still have the similar desires as far as we're using like actual humans in the field. There's a lot more AI stuff, so there might not be the same need to have things that are shelf stable that travel with the soldiers, If there are, Spam fits in there, but there are a lot of other, I think, food technology developments in terms of preservation that the military uses.
Yeah, but if you're talking about wartime food in the 21st century,
Yeah.
problem is now is if you're in the Ukraine or even worse, the Sudan, or
Yeah.
now, unfortunately, the Gaza,
Yeah.
or now Iran,
Yeah.
they're going to be in even worse. It seems to me could be in a worse situation than people were in World War II. I don't even know how they would have access to almost anything.
In terms of the food to access. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they don't have ready-made tins of Spam available to them. And those countries, a lot of those people do not eat pork. And so you cannot give them Spam,
All
so
right.
you have to have the food that fits with that culture.
Oh yeah, right. Because of Judaism, wasn't there one Spam that didn't contain any pork at all?
There's a plant-based Spam that's made in Hong Kong. And so you can get that, and that's not made out of pork. So you could, give that to Muslims, Jews, if they wanted it, But I think nowadays, I hope that the military thinks about what are the foodways of these people that we are, we're occupying, and can we sort of support their foodways instead of sort of pushing on them our foodways.
Right.
So often we see in American history that foodways are pushed on. So think about the Native Americans, pushed on to them, which doesn't fit with their needs or their health, and it has long-term consequences.
Well, this has been really fascinating because for two reasons. One, it's not something I would have ever thought about in terms of, as I said earlier, the cultural impact. And two, because it's really a good entree, no pun intended, to the edible series by Reaction. Don't you think it's a great series? Oh
yeah, it's a great series. I mean, things that, pancakes and waffles and caviar, like things that you just think are just food that you just eat, have this really interesting complex history. And this series really shows it. And as you're saying, it really brings out the cultural connections. It talks about politics, economics, everything. So yeah, I really encourage people to check out this series.
Yeah, I look forward to having this series, including your book, in the bookstore.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, because it's out in mid-August.
So yeah, some of the dates are different. In Amazon, it says July now, but everything else says August. So who knows?
Does it? Okay, yeah, because before I thought it was July, and then when I look on Amazon, it says August, but maybe it's changed. So I need to go and check it. It's out in the UK right now, so you can buy it in the UK, and you can buy it on Kindle. So everywhere you are, if you want to buy the electronic version, you can get it on Kindle. So I have the electronic version at the minute. But they won't ship it to me because I'm in the United States until July. So I don't have my hands on the actual book yet, which is, but people in Britain can buy it right now.
One of them mail you a copy.
I know. Well, they have a different distributor for the United States. And so that's why I don't get it till later. So it's sort of ironic that I don't have my book, but I have friends in the UK who have already read it. The hard copy. So, but the Kindle, I have the Kindle version. So, if you're desperate to read about Spam, it's available now everywhere.
I will advise, I don't mind advising my customers, look, if I don't have it yet, but it's okay. I'm not going to be upset if you download it on Amazon.
No, we want them to come and buy your lovely bookstore,
You do much better that way as well.
Well, yes, that's true. That's true too. Yes.
Well, thanks so much, Kelly. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed the book.
Thank you. It's great talking to you. I'm glad you had tried out Spam.
Yeah, it's still at the bookstore. Maybe I'll
get the Korean barbecue. I highly recommend that. Maybe your younger employees will appreciate that more, especially considering Korean food culture in the United States right now.
Yeah, maybe I'll go onto the website and buy a sampling and put them in the store. I have a lot of strange things and people enjoy seeing them.
Oh, so the customers would buy the Spam in your store?
They would say.
That would be great. It's a preview to the book coming soon. Yeah.
But I can do a display.
Oh, wow. If you do that, please do send me a photo. I'd love to see that.
I will do that.
I would love to see that. Yeah, it's great. I'm sorry that your bookstore is not closer to me. I'd love to come and sort of visit it. It looks really nice.
Near Philadelphia, just come by and chat.
I will definitely let you know if I'm up there.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.